What are appropriate things for us to be doing with our spare time, and what are less appropriate things for us to be doing with our spare time? I think it's particularly pertinent now. I mean, I think it's pertinent at all times, but Dafka today at work, we had a seminar with a psychologist, and the psychologist was talking to us about how to cope as an individual, how to cope during stressful times that we're all going through now. What are some of the tools that we can utilize with which to navigate a tricky time? And one of the things that he mentioned is the importance of taking a break. Sort of if chas v'shalom, when somebody leaves this world, you have to go to a levaya. You can't go from one levaya to another levaya, to another levaya, to another. You can't go to one after the other, because each one you build up the sort of like this emotional energy.
What's a levaya?
A funeral. So, like, if you were to go from one funeral to a shiva, to a funeral, to a shiva, each one it's accumulative, and therefore the experience at the fourth will be just overwhelming. And the way that we process it is, you have to have a gap. You have to somehow sort of process, process grief or pain by stepping out for a few minutes. And then you are better. You're better placed to be able to process further pain. You follow? But if you're unable to take breaks, if you're unable to sort of cut from A to B, so then it sort of builds up and builds up and builds up, and it becomes very, very difficult to cope with. One of the greatest joys, if you're able to, is to have a good night's sleep. Because sometimes when you have a good night's sleep, it allows you to, you see things in some sort of perspective. The sleep that I have overnight is a break, and it gives me renewed energy for the following day. So in that context, I want to talk about, what's appropriate. What would be an appropriate break? I think that it's interesting because we all know what the appropriate thing to do during shiur time. During shiur, so we sit and we participate, we study. But then after the shiur, we're going to finish tonight at 10. So assuming you don't go to bed at 10, now what's an appropriate way to wind down? Assuming, for those people that have energy, will go back to studying the Beit Midrash. But at some stage, there's going to be a moment after I close my sefer before I go to sleep. So what's an appropriate way to behave during those times? You follow? Okay, I'll explain how important this is with our introductory source, which is from the Gemara in Eruvin. So the Gemara in Eruvin quotes a rabbi called Rabbi Eli, and he says, "Bishlosha dvarim ha'adam nikar." There are three indicators, I suppose, to reveal the character of a person. Bishlosha dvarim ha'adam nikar. The first one is koso, meaning how kos is his cup. When they speak about drink at the time of the Talmud, the only drink was alcoholic drink. So it was talking about, what's your relationship? Do you know when to stop? And if chas v'shalom someone doesn't know when to stop, what comes out? Sort of my relationship to alcohol. That's the first one. Kiso. The second one is his pockets, meaning his money. How does somebody utilize their money? And the third thing is ka'aso, and that is, what are they like when they are angry? Koso, kiso, ka'aso. Do you hear the what do you call that when it's a poet, some sort of poetry? Do you see that? The cuffs. Yeah, it's a sort of word, Zachariah. I'm sort of relying on you here. Okay, but say this. So it's koso, kiso, ka'aso, and then Amri, and there are others who add af besochko, which is sort of related. Sochko means his play, meaning alliteration. Thank you so much. You are such a gift. The fourth one is sochko, which means your play. What do you do in your free time? And I think this is such an important idea. We are defined by the way that we utilize our free time. You know what I'm... Because really, the way I utilize my free time is an indication of, I wish I could do this all the time, but I can't because I have commitments. But tachlis, at the end of the day, when I've done everything that I need to do, what do I look forward to? You follow? Sochko. And that is a real indication of my passion, of who I am. You follow? So therefore, the question of how I utilize my free time, even if it's a very small amount of my day, is a really critical insight into who I am. Not for the world, but for me to understand who I am. You follow? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at various sources. I would divide it, let's say, into 3 sections. The first section is discussing what you shouldn't do based on the Gemara. The Gemara gives us some quite clear definitions of free time activities that are not great. Not great, just to explain to Ami, Kam, and everybody else, is a way of if an English person wants to say it's absolutely terrible, they say not great. You follow? But that's what I mean. You follow? It's really... Okay, so that's the first section. We're going to talk about activities that are not good. The second section is we're going to... I suppose we're going up in time. So if the first section is about 2,000 years old, we're looking at the Gemara. After that, we're going to go forward till about 300 years ago. To activities that people were doing about 300 years ago, talking about whether they were appropriate or not appropriate. And then our final section, we're going from 2,000 to 300 years ago. Finally, really today, talk about how rabbis talk about some of the things that people do today, whether they are appropriate or inappropriate ways to utilize our time. And I only mention it now because, particularly at this time, it's really important for all of us, in order to be able to function as a human being, you have to have a way of calming down, of relaxing. Everyone needs sochko at the moment. Everyone needs something. I hate the word to chill. I wish there was another word. But you need something that allows you to rest, to recharge, and then you're able to, to move on to the next day. So therefore, defining what's guidelines of what's good or what's not good is a really important discussion. Okay, so we're going to start with the Gemara. We're actually going to start from the very first verse of the book of Tehillim, and then look at how the Gemara discusses it. The very, very first, chapter 1, verse 1, says like this: Ashrei ha'ish, praise be a person, asher lo halach ba'atzat rishaim, doesn't go in the ways of the wicked, u'v'derech chata'im, or the way of the sinners, lo amad, it doesn't spend time with them. And now look at this, the last one, moshav leitzim lo yashav, he doesn't spend time with a moshav leitzim. Moshav is like from the word lashevet, to sit. Leitzim are... well, there's a word in English, but I don't know if anyone knows. Do you know what the word loafers? Do you know what that word means?
Loafers.
A loafer.
Only the shoes.
They're people that just are non-productive people.
Oh yeah.
Just like,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Lazy people.
Yeah, I don't know if... Okay, but it's lazy people that are getting together. The guy's not lying in his bed. The Gemara now will define what a moshav leitzim is. Okay. Tonu Rabbana, in source number 3. This is a brighter. Ha'olech, somebody who goes, litz tadion, to a stadium. Ule karkum. Karkum is like a... I think they have these gatherings of cities that were besieged, and they would do some schok, like entertainment and clowning around there. And if a guy went to this stadium, and at the stadium, Ra'asham Nechashim are like sorcerers, people doing sorcery. This is 2,000 years old sorcery. Okay. Ve'et ha'chaverin. I'm not sure what all of these things are. Bukion, Mukion, Molion, Velolion. These all sound like quite Greek activities, no? Bolorin, Salgurin. They are all types of, there's like a sorcery or witchcraft. That's the general idea over here. Harezer, this is called a Moshav Leitzim. Moshav Leitzim is a group of people that are not being productive. Aleim Katuv Omer, and on them the Torah tells us, the psalmist tells us, Ashri Haish Asher Lo Halach Batzat Kim B'Torah Hashem Chevtzo Halamata Shedvarim Halalu Meviyim Et Hadam Lidei Bitul Torah. These things will bring somebody to the idea of Bitul Torah. Bitul Torah. Now, late sanut, a late son in modern Hebrew, is a clown. A late son, that clowning around isn't necessarily bad, but I think there's probably levels of it. It's really talking about something that would lead me to Bitul Torah. Those are all activities that we want to avoid. Going to a big public event, and where at this big public event, I suppose sorcerers, like sorcery, it's sort of like it's or astrology, all that sort of stuff. People are lured by it, right? You know, they used to have in the 19th century in England, or the beginning of the 20th century as well, science, you know, where they used to speak to the dead, all that sort of stuff is Moshav Leitzim. That stuff is activities that will lead to Bitul Torah. That people are drawn to these sorts of activities, but they're not productive. They don't lead to any positivity in the world, and therefore these are forbidden. Is that clear to you? The problem is, and we'll come to this in a minute, the Breiter told us not to go to a stadium, but nowadays stadiums are quite, there are quite a few stadiums all around the world. In fact, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, when there was this big siyum of the Daf HaYomi in New York. Anyone here from New York? Are you from New York? Oh no, you're not. But there's a Met something. Stadium. Yeah, it was stadium. Exactly, it had this huge siyum in it. So it's not about the place; it's more about the activity that takes place in the place. Oh. Go on. Are you going to go on?
Up those words.
Yeah, and what are they all?
Like it says,
there's Mukion, they're like sorcerers and witchcraft and.
Yeah, I mean this one says Mukion, possibly from the Latin macus, meaning a buffoon. Mulion, some claim that is related to the Latin mulio, meaning a mule. Okay, like somebody would probably make some jokes or whatever. Like Lulion, some believe that this originates from Greek. Lalos, meaning a chatterbox or prattler. I don't know what that means. Like a clown, okay. Possibly refers to a clown. Belurin, some explain that is a form of the Greek fluaros, meaning nonsense. Okay. And Sagurin, according to some versions of the text, the word is Sagilrin. It possibly originates from the Latin siglaria, the connotation of the Saturnalia festival. Okay. In which many comic acts were performed. Okay, like all kinds of joking kind of.
Right.
Yeah. That's the idea here.
So it's like sorcery or faffing around, like just.
Can.
Okay, excellent.
Like watching YouTube.
What? So I want to tell you. I want to give you a tip, people, because sometimes, assuming as human beings, Hashem created us in such a way that we need to wind down. So it's very easy to say everything is forbidden. Nachon? Like sort of comedy is not permitted, and I don't know, like stand up, you shouldn't be allowed, or all this frivolity is not something which is productive. The problem is that you do need something. The end of your day, you close your sefer, and you don't go straight to bed. You do need to wind down. How can I know if my choice of activity is an appropriate one or an inappropriate one? How do I distinguish between, there are religious comics. So how do I distinguish between frivolity, that, like just a buffoon, and what's the difference between a buffoon and a stand-up comic? So I want to suggest a tip. And the question is, who else goes to the show? You follow? I mean, if I see that the people attracted to this activity are really not people who are engaged in a serious life or, thoughtful existence. They're not people who are, obviously, if we're talking within a Jewish community, are they B'nai Torah or are they not B'nai Torah? But if you're in Chutz La'aretz, where you're living in a city where not everyone are B'nai Torah, who are the people that are drawn to go to this activity? If the people who are drawn to go to the activity are sort of, the non-productive members of society, so then it's probably an indication that that's not a good place for you to be, because it's the association, it's moshav leitzim, hanging out in a place that does not attract thoughtful people. You follow? But on the assumption that everybody needs, some place you need to, sort of wind down and, sort of process your life. So even Talmidei Chachamim also need to wind down. So I should choose my winding down activities that are those that are similar to the people that I admire. You follow what does that make sense to you? Okay, that's, I think, the difference. So the way to distinguish between a buffoon and an artist is a buffoon attracts buffoons. You follow? But an artist could attract serious people who are interested in learning a trade, appreciating something beautiful. Does that make sense to you? People. Okay, so that's in terms of the first source. Really, it's very much to do with who I spend my time with. Okay, continuing really on exactly the same theme, we now go to a question. The question is a question that was asked to a rabbi on source number 5, called the Noda B'Yehuda. Anyone here heard of the Noda B'Yehuda? Let me just give you a background to this very, very exciting question. The Noda B'Yehuda was the chief rabbi of Prague, and he lived in the 18th century. I think it was like 1720 something till 1790 something, very roughly. He lived in the 18th century. As you know, the 18th century was a very, very important century in Jewish history, because it was really the beginning of the Enlightenment, the beginning of Jewish people, in Europe at least, who had lived for many, many years in these secluded ghettos, and they began integrating into general society. Now, all the questions that asked to the Noda B'Yehuda, many of the questions at least, are historically fascinating, because he was the rabbi on the scene at an incredibly important time in Jewish history. So, sort of defining the relationship between the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community, when they're sort of discovering what boundaries we should be setting, the Noda B'Yehuda is one of the primary sources to help us navigate that integration into society. And the tshuva, the responsum that we're going to look at now, is an example of that process of integration. He was asked a question. The person who asked him the question is not somebody that he knows. He says that in the first line, Eineni makiroto. I don't know who you are, but the question is an incredible question. The question is, am I, as a Jew, allowed to go on a Sunday morning hunt with my newly acquired non-Jewish friends? is that an activity that is appropriate? Is that an appropriate activity for us to do, or is that an inappropriate activity for us to do? Now, just to contextualize that, the idea of a Jew and a non-Jew going together on a hunt, the sort of, kings and princes are the people that go on hunts. The Jewish schleppers they're not people that would be going on a hunt. So it's an indication of the level to which the Jewish community had managed to integrate into society. The very fact that they're asking this question is amazing. That's the question that was asked to the Nodab Yehuda. Are you allowed to go on a hunt? Ma atem choshvim? What would you think? Is this is that a moshav leitim? It's not in a stadium. Is it a Jewish activity?
Are we considering the risk of the person shooting you?
No, well, unless they've got a really bad aim. That's really interesting.
I don't know. It's a lot of times. You hear all these things that sound like crazy now, like the reason why we have the shofar in Musaf. Guys came and killed us because we were playing the horse in the morning. So
Right.
I don't know. Are you saying modern day? Is that
Yeah, this was much more recently. This is 300 years ago.
I don't think so. We can't do anything with the meat anyway. It's not a kosher slaughter. So what are we going to do on a hunt?
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Did they eat the hunt at the end? Is that what they used to do? I suppose they probably did. Yeah, you're probably right there. You're right. Yes. So the truth is, he makes two very important points. One of them is just interesting halachically, and the second point is pertinent to our discussion. The first thing he says is, there is a halachic concept of tsar ba'alei chaim. Are you familiar with that concept? Unnecessary cruelty to animals. You're not allowed to cause unnecessary cruelty to animals. Right? In fact, there is many rabbinic authorities rule that there is a food called foie gras. Do you know what that is?
Oh yeah.
That's Zachariah.
It's horrible stuff. These French people are really sick with their food. I'm serious.
Isn't it terrible?
You know those things that you use to fill the oil in your car, those funnels? They basically take that and shove food down.
Into what?
Into the goose. Into the goose to fatten up its liver. Yeah,
it's terrible.
The goose doesn't even want to eat this much food. I don't know.
So many rabbis rule that foie gras is forbidden because it is tsar ba'alei chaim. I don't need that food. I think I could eat other food and I'd be quite happy. And therefore there's a very interesting halachic debate about tsar ba'alei chaim. So I would have thought that to kill an animal is also tsar ba'alei chaim. Interestingly, the Nodab Yehuda says that it's not considered tsar ba'alei chaim to go on a hunt. The reason is because tsar ba'alei chaim is pointless to cause pain for no good reason. But if it's part of a social activity, so then it would not be a problem with tsar ba'alei chaim, and I would be allowed on those. If that was the only halachic consideration, I would be allowed to go on the hunt. But why can't I go? The same reason as what we saw in the Gemara earlier. And the Gemara says, if we look at the Torah, who does the Torah describe as a hunter? Esav. Excellent. Esav. Nachon? Esav ish tzayid. Ish sadeh. Nachon? As we'll read in a few weeks' time. Esav the hunter. When I go on a hunt, I'm choosing, rather than identifying myself as Yaakov ish Tam, I'm defining myself, or I'm associating myself with the community of the hunters, and that's not the Jewish community. The Jewish community are not the hunters.
Or the trappers.
Yeah.
We have a trapper.
Yeah, that's how we get our animals. Yeah, exactly. But the idea of that pleasure out of hunting is not a Jewish activity. But it goes back to what we said in the previous discussion about, what's the difference between an artist and a buffoon? So the buffoon attracts buffoon admirers to his shows. And since I don't want to identify as a buffoon admirer, that show is not for me. You follow? But an artist that attracts, cultured, people that are looking to appreciate beauty in the world, well, then I identify as part of that community, and that would be appropriate for me. Same idea over here. When it comes to 300 years ago, leisure activities, if hunting is my thing, I'm choosing to identify outside of the Jewish community because it's not a Jewish thing to do. Does that make sense to you? Joy, happiness, everything clear? I'll give you one more example of this, actually. There's a big debate in halakha about piercings. Which piercings are permitted, which piercings are not permitted, piercing here, piercing there, whatever it is you choose to do. And one of the arguments to forbid, especially for men, to do piercings, and also for women, other piercings, is when as a man, even though you could say it's not wounding myself, it'll be very hard to find a solid halachic argument. But really, it's about when I pierce myself, I'm choosing to identify within a subculture. You follow? Meaning, who are the people in the world with piercings? Is that part? Are people in the Torah community people with piercings? They're not, and therefore, I'm choosing through a piercing. Not just purely for the beauty that I think I look so much better with it, but it's really a statement. It's a statement that I'm saying I wish to identify in a particular community. And that community is not necessarily a community that is closer to Torah than the community in which I find myself now. You follow? And for that reason, almost for a socio-halachic reason, if you could call it that, piercings are forbidden because it's my statement that I choose to identify in a particular subculture, and that subculture in which I've chosen to identify myself is normally further from Torah than the culture that I currently find myself. Is that clear? Same idea we saw in the Moshav Leitzim and the buffoons, same idea that we see in the Nodab Yudah concerning hunting. Okay. So now we've discussed really a sort of background. We looked at the Talmud, then we looked at the Nodab Yudah. Let's come to modern day activities today. What activities are appropriate and which ones aren't? I have to apologize to everybody because in the good old days, there was a clock over there.
Oh, yeah.
And that clock told us what the time was. So if we get to 1, 2 in the morning, so just let me know. Is that okay with everyone? Thank you so much. Great. Okay. So now let's talk about modern activities. To that, we'll start with Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein lived on the Lower East Side of New York, a very, very important halachic authority, and he died in 1986 approximately, maybe a bit before or a bit after, but sort of in terms of the halachic journey since the time of the Talmud, he's certainly very much considered as a modern rabbinic authority, halachic authority. Okay, so he rules like this, in source number 6. He was asked, Ha'im asur mitzad b'chukotem lo telechu lalechet leteatron or le'itztadion sport biyamenu? Is it forbidden to go to the theatre or to go to a sports? Can you go to a football match? Is a football match an appropriate halachic activity? You're into sport, is that right? So hang in. Okay? So do you watch on television or you go to...
I've been to the Teddy Stadium and watched Beitar games.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And did they win?
Yeah, sometimes they win, sometimes they lose.
I suppose that's probably how it works. That's probably what sport is. Okay, באלו שנקראו תיאטרון שעושים שם ענייני צחוק. וכן איצטדיון שהם המקומות שמשחקים ספורט. So, לא שייכי בהו עניין בחוקותיהם לא תלכו. There's no, I'm not identifying as part of a non-Jewish culture by going to a theatre or going to a sport. I just want to maybe I should have mentioned this previously at the beginning of this source. B'chukotehem lo telecho. Are you familiar with that verse? B'chukotehem lo telecho means you should not go in their statutes, meaning we're not allowed to follow non-Jewish culture. But this b'chukotehem lo telecho, to follow non-Jewish culture, is very limited. It's only talking about non-Jewish culture with religious undertones. So, for example, I would not celebrate New Year's Eve, because even though New Year's Eve is a big celebration, but because it has a religious undertone, it's really commemorating the beginning of a secular year. We have a Jewish year, so therefore celebrating it would be an issue of ubechukoteim lo telechu, as opposed to, let's say, Thanksgiving in America, because Thanksgiving is also a big cultural event, but there's no religious undertones. It's not a religious event. It's only recalling a historical event, but it has no religious undertones, and therefore it would not fall under the category of b'chukotehem lo telechu. You follow? So when Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked about football or theatre, he says it's not. There's no problem of. I'm not choosing to identify within non-Jewish culture because it's much more like Thanksgiving than it is to New Year's Eve. You follow? New Year's Eve is a problem that's like a religious undertones, but it's closer to Thanksgiving. Does that make sense to you? Sports games. So far, we're all right. Okay, let's continue. Okay, but then he continues. Where's he going to continue? Over here. Okay. He says, I'm going to go to 4 lines up from the bottom. Al-Kain. Rov HaMedinot, in most of the countries of the world, most of the cultured countries that have theatres and stadiums, we're not worried about uvechukotem lo telechu, shevadai lo shachi halav to bechukotem lo telechu, ela heim meisur leitzanut uvitul Torah. However, there could be a problem of leitzanut, which is frivolity and not utilizing my time properly in Torah. The gam od isur gadol yesh יצרו של עריות בנפשי דרובן הם דברי ניבול פה והסתה לעריות. Sometimes there are modesty problems in these places, and therefore you have to be careful about where you go. So in essence, it's not a problem, but there are lots of corollary things that could be problematic in going to a football game. But I think it goes back to what we said right at the beginning about who are the people that go to the match. Like if they're it's like solid people go to watch football, there's no reason why you shouldn't be among them to watch the game. I'll just tell you a very quick story about football. I don't follow football myself, but there is a rabbi here in Israel. His name is Rav Ze'ev Leff. Have any of you heard of him? He's a quite well-known American rabbi. I think he's the rabbi of a city near Modi'in called Matityahu, Moshav Matityahu. He's written some books. He's a very, very well-known rabbi here in Israel. Anyway, so a couple of years ago, his grandchildren desperately wanted to go to a football game with him. Now, I'm not sure if the football game was in Israel or if it was in America, but it was a really, really big game. Like it was a final. And because he's a good grandfather, he he agreed to go with his grandchildren to watch the game. And at some point during the game, his team scored. Now, have you been in a football game when your team score? So the Olam get very excited about it. Anyway, so what the camera, they're often big screens. So a screen often zooms in on a couple of rows just to show, the excitement. Everyone's really getting into this. So it happens to be that when they zoomed in after the team scored, his team scored, they happened to zoom in on him. But he had no interest in football, and he had brought his Gemara, and he was absolutely immersed in his Gemara learning. And there's this amazing picture of this full stadium, and everyone, half of the stadium, and wild cheering, and on the screen you just see this rabbi shakua in his, absolutely absorbed in his Torah learning. Isn't that amazing? Exactly, a real Kiddush Hashem. So there's nothing wrong. If it's your thing, it's not there's no halachic problem. The only issue is bitul Torah, and bitul Torah is an issue if it consumes you. You know what I mean? Like, everybody needs to wind down, and everyone needs an opportunity to take a break. But when it consumes you, you have to see every single match. So then it becomes an investment that's perhaps beyond what is reasonable. Does that make sense? Okay. That is concerning football. Now, I want to talk, if we look in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Lamed Chet is Hilchot Shabbat. And he has a whole discussion here. It's very, very interesting. A whole discussion about muktzah, about things that are permitted to do on Shabbat and things that are not permitted to do on Shabbat. And in that context, one of the questions is about playing games on Shabbat. Can you play games on Shabbat? Can you not play games on Shabbat? And they're talking about a game. I'm not sure exactly what the game is. It looks a little bit like chess to me, the way it's described. But I want to read to you in source number. Source number 7 says that you're allowed to play games on Shabbat. There's nothing wrong with playing games on Shabbat. I'd even say, assuming that you're not playing, something with electricity, obviously. And some people don't play Monopoly because it uses money. But assuming you're playing a game like chess or drafts or Othello, do you know Othello? Mm-hmm. Reverse it. Playing one of those games, backgammon. So all those sorts of games, you're not doing anything wrong by playing those games, and it's perfectly fine for you to play those games on Shabbat. Now look at source number 8, the Mishnah Brura. So this is the Shulchan Aruch in source number 7 says it's permitted to play games on Shabbat, which is important for us to understand. That is a good outlet. Like a board game is a great outlet. It's a good use of time on a Shabbat. I'm not wasting time. It's not frivolity. Sometimes it sharpens your mind when you're playing chess or Othello. These are good activities. Not the whole of Shabbat, but these are good ways to utilize your time. Look what the Mishnah Berurah says in source number 8. I love this. He says, talking about the game, V'nohagin, there is a custom, la'asotam shel kesef. There are some people who have a special chess set made out of silver, sheyu miyuchadim l'Shabbat. And then it's clear it's not just chess, it's Shabbos chess. Or it's not just Othello, it's Shabbos Othello. And it makes it into part of my Shabbat activities. To imlo kain, because if it's not, then it sort of like cheapens the Shabbat just to be playing games. But if you invest in the game, then it becomes a Shabbat activity, and then it's a perfectly permitted thing to do. Do you see that? This in source number 8. If you don't have this silver set, it could look like belittles the game, but I can do it as part of my respect for Shabbat, that you invest in your Shabbat games, that are games that you play specifically on Shabbat. So it turns it from just like a cheap way to use time, to like this is a designated Shabbat activity. You hear that? In general, I mean, this is just a tip in general about time management and utilizing my free time, especially when you were mentioning YouTube earlier. So, assuming that we deal with all of our other issues, there's no problem with language, there's no problem with tzniut, that everything that I'm watching is appropriate stuff. When you designate time to something, it makes it much more valuable and much more justified. Sort of, if I've got a special chess set that I only use on Shabbat, so it makes the chess that I play on Shabbat a Shabbat activity, rather than just like taking out the regular chess set, because I've designated this chess set as my Shabbos chess set by sort of a parallel. I don't know to what extent this is a parallel, but it sounded like a parallel in my head a minute ago. If I, like at the end of the day, I want to unwind and there's some clip I want to watch, but if I know beforehand I'm going to watch it and I'm going to put this 10 minutes aside and then I'm going to watch it, so it makes it much easier to integrate that into my life than if I'm just like sitting and just like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, it's just going away. When it's designated, and that designated, either I've got my designated chess set or my designated time for whatever activity is, it makes it much more integrated into a Torah lifestyle rather than when I sort of just like slide into it. Does that make sense? Okay. Joy, happiness, any questions until now? Everything clear?
Question.
Oh, Yosef.
About the monopoly. The money is not real money.
Really? Oh my gosh.
No, I mean, why it's not?
It's not. So the truth is, money. There's no problem with money. Maybe I should. Thank you very, very much. An excellent point. The problem of using money on Shabbat is, it's not that there's a concept of avirat HaShabbat, like sort of setting a certain I don't know, like atmosphere on Shabbat. I have to say, one of the trickiest things is figuring out how to create the Shabbat atmosphere in a home. If somebody was lucky enough to grow up in an observant home, so then they know what that Shabbat feel is, and they just sort of take it from their childhood home, and they're able to continue it as they get older. But for somebody that didn't have that Shabbat atmosphere as a child, learning how to create it becomes difficult. But there are many things that are forbidden on Shabbat, not because it's a melacha. There's no transgression in Shabbat if I touch a 50 shekel note. If I sell something or I buy something on Shabbat, there's no melacha forbidding selling or buying. But the reason why these things are forbidden is because it's not appropriate Shabbat talk. I think that Rabbi Sachs actually had a beautiful line about Shabbat. Rabbi Sachs said that during the week we engage with one another based on what you do. Like I speak to him because he's my lawyer, I speak to him because he's my accountant, speak to him, he's my dentist. So during the week, I speak to you because of what you do. And on Shabbat, I speak to you for who you are. I love that. You follow? It's not about my profession, it's about who I am. But any discussion of money would bring us down to more of the what I do and less of the who I am. You follow? So therefore, business, talking about money, even at a Shabbat meal, is not appropriate. If you see, I know somebody's got a new Kiddush cup, you wouldn't say, how much did that cost? Because we don't talk about money on Shabbat. So it's less about like muktzah or not muktzah. It's more like having a discussion that's relating to money. So for real money, not real money, it's more about a discussion, like about this costs this and buying and selling. It's just not sort of a Shabbat discussion. That's really the issue.
Okay.
But because it's a game and we're not really buying Park Lane or whatever it is you're buying, you're not really, because it's not, I mean, it's a game and everyone knows it is. So that's the side to say it's not a problem. And the other side, I think we explained both sides now. Is that clear? Thank you. Excellent question. Okay. Any other? Yes.
Last question, Rabbi, about
Sure.
the Torah for let's say financial book, like let's say there's like a book for like one roommate showed me like a book for managing your finances, but it says Kabbalah for finances, something like this. Like,
Yes, I'm not sure I would read a book about like
receivables.
I'm not sure I would read that on Shabbat.
So even though it's like a Torah, now you
Oh,
basically in Shulchan Aruch there's like a business.
Oh, there is.
topic.
You're right. No, you're right. You're right. But yeah, it's a fine line. If I'm learning Torah. Obviously, it's fine. Any Torah that I learn is the most beautiful thing in the world. But if I'm really planning my is my mind on Shabbat? I want my mind to be on Shabbat and not in the office. You follow? So if I'm going to read a book and that book will take my mind from Shabbat and I'll be in the office, so I would avoid those sorts of books on Shabbat.
So, what you just said, that your like mind is on the office, and these sort of books. As a yeshiva student, there's like a problem that I run into is that I have a normal seder throughout the week, and I've made a choice. I don't know whatever the rabbis say. I made a choice like not to do my personal like study on Shabbat because it feels like I'm just like continuing the week. Like I'm doing like the Rambam every day, and then I'm like, okay, I gotta do my Rambam today. I gotta read this book, that book, and then it just feels like it feels like back at the office. It's just a unique as a yeshiva student in that way.
Yeah, the truth is that the Torah learning of a yeshiva student and the Torah study of a non-yeshiva student is different. It's true. Let's say for you, go back to what we were saying right at the beginning of today. You live in the palace of the king. So you have the opportunity every single day to have your Gemara open and to sort of just like to dance in whatever book you're studying all day long. It's the greatest joy in the world. So on Shabbat, what a lot of people do is they utilize Shabbat to review that which they studied during the week. But for those people that don't have the joy of living in the palace of the king, for many of them, Shabbat is the only opportunity to be involved in Torah study, and therefore there are many Gemara classes or other Torah classes that only meet on Shabbat. Because for those people who are not in the palace of the king, this is their only opportunity for Torah learning. But I think the schedule of a yeshiva student and the schedule for a non-yeshiva student is different. A non-yeshiva student has to move on Shabbat. Because if they don't, Shabbat's the day they have opportunity to study more than any other day. So if they're not going to move ahead on Shabbat, when are they going to, have the opportunity to be immersed in Torah? But the yeshiva student who learnt 6 chapters of Rambam this week, so Shabbat would be the opportunity to review rather than do one more chapter. Does that make sense, Zachariah?
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Review it. Yeah, make it more comfortable to review. Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeshiva students' review is a better Shabbat activity than moving ahead. Okay, I want to move on now to 2 more activities. 1 second. 2. Well, the truth is, I'm going to summarize them only because we're running out of time. The first thing I want to learn from a book called Yechaveh Da'at. Yechaveh Da'at is a book written by Rav Ovadia Yosef. Rav Ovadia Yosef, yesterday, we commemorated the 10th year since his passing. I think that Rav Ovadia's funeral was the largest event that took place in the state of Israel. I might be wrong. I think there were over 600,000 people at his funeral. It was a huge event here. Anyway, so he was asked about bullfights, and again, it's the same principle. Who goes to a bullfight? Exactly, you follow. It's the same as the earrings, same as the buffoons. Those are the people I'm choosing to associate with. However, on his discussion of bullfights, he then goes on to talk about another activity, and that is visiting a zoo. He tells the story of the Chida, who was in the 19th century, visits, I don't know where he wrote it, but the Chida was visiting London. And do you know what the Chida did when he visited London? Do you know where he went? He went to London Zoo. He went to London Zoo to look at all the amazing animals. He says that to go to a zoo and look at the sort of the variety of God's creation, to appreciate God's hand in this world, the remarkable variety of the world. He saw, this is in source number 9, talks about how incredible it is to visit a zoo. Now, I only mention the zoo not because let's all go to the zoo tomorrow, but a factor in deciding whether my leisure activity is an appropriate leisure activity or not suitable leisure activity. So one thing was, are buffoons. Is it room? If it's a room of buffoons, I don't want to be in that room. But if it's a room of people who are interested in broadening their minds, so then those are the people that I would like to associate with. That was a factor number 1. The second factor is compare the experience of somebody who goes to a bullfight to somebody who goes to the zoo. I can go home from the zoo and have a greater appreciation of God, because I can see the variety of creation. I can, as a result of my trip to the zoo, have a closer and deeper appreciation of the greatness of God. And therefore, a zoo is a fantastic leisure activity, and a bullfight less so. So that's the second factor that I would add. Meaning, when I complete the activity, so how's that impacted my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Am I further away, or am I the same place, or am I closer? And if there's a possibility of closer, you listen to some beautiful music, could move you, whatever it is, whatever activity it is, those activities that could draw me closer are fantastic. Is that clear? Okay. The very last, I'm not going to read it inside, but I'll just mention it to you. There was a discussion, and this is a little bit dated. Sources 10 and 11 talk about television. I would say it's very similar to the discussion nowadays concerning the internet. Like I suppose 20 years ago, the question was, should you own a television or should you not own a television? And the question today is, should you use internet? Should you not use internet? Or to what extent should you be using the internet? And the source number 11, this is Rabbi Mann from a place called Eretz Chemda, a very important Jerusalem Halachic Institute in our neighborhood, actually. So he writes, it's not about the kli, it's not about the vessel, it's about how I utilize it. The television, internet could go in so many different directions. I have to make sure that I use this powerful tool in the right direction. So for us, it means things like making sure that our phones have got filters on them, making sure that we define the times that we're going to use it, make sure when I click on a YouTube, who are the people that are being drawn to this clip? Is it the buffoons of the world, or is it the cultured people of the world? If this clip was made for buffoons, so then it's probably not appropriate to me to be, that's not my. But if it's made for people who have a little bit, sort of thoughtful people like yourselves, so then it would be an appropriate thing to do. But it's not about the kli, it's not about the vessel, it's about how I utilize the vessel. Is that clear to everybody? So 2 points. Well, we've been on a journey. It's been a lovely journey. We started in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah with our sorcerers and our buffoons and our comics. and then we went from there to the hunters, and then from the hunters we went to the zoo, and then from the zoo we went to the television. Have I missed anything out there? And we have
In between, no?
2 principles. Oh yeah, we did sports activities.
Oh yeah.
That's right, the sports and the theatre. I think that there are 3 factors in deciding whether it's appropriate. The first question is, who was this activity intended for? You follow? And if I am a proud member of the community for whom this was intended for, then I shall participate in it. But if I'm embarrassed to be part of the community for whom this was intended for, that's probably not a good thing for me to do. Number 1. Number 2 is b'chukotehem lo telechu, and that's, we're talking about sports and we're talking about a theatre, that if there are any non-Jewish religious undertones, then it's not appropriate. So to go to a New Year's Eve party is no good. And if there's any activity that has religious undertones but not Jewish undertones, I'd want to avoid that. That's the second point. And the third point is, what's the third point?
Vessel?
Yes, it's about the vessel. Ah, yes, also. No, but does this, like the difference between a zoo and, does it draw me closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Is it something that this activity could, as a result of this activity, I could have a greater appreciation of God? I could feel that through music. You know, there's a story about Rav Kook. Rav Kook was stuck in London, Nebuch, for 3 years during the First World War. Do you know what Rav Kook used to do when he was in London, when he wanted inspiration? You'll never believe this. So there was the Jewish newspaper in London. When Rav Kook was there, they interviewed him. And they said, you're now in London, you've left the Holy Land. How are you going to cope in London without the inspiration of living in the Holy Land? Do you know where he went in London for his inspiration? He went to the National Gallery. In the National Gallery in London, near Trafalgar Square, even till today, there is a room dedicated to the artwork of Rembrandt. Now, Rembrandt was did many biblical portraits, and Rav Kook wrote about Rembrandt, or said in this interview about Rembrandt, that when God created the world, he said God brought light into the world, and then he hid it for the righteous people in future generations. He said some of that light from the creation of the world was given to Rembrandt with which to... So you could go to the zoo, you could go to an art gallery, you could listen to music. All of these activities are activities with which I'm inspired, I'm drawn closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You follow? So, sweet, wonderful people, we have to understand 2 things. First of all, you have to find productive ways to utilize our free time. You can't study 24/7. You need a break. But the break has to be within the lifestyle, within the framework of the life that you're trying to lead. You follow? Because if it's outside of that framework, then it could have a negative impact on your Torah study. So I want to bless us all, particularly during this tricky time, that we should manage to find appropriate, healthy, wholesome free time activities to allow us to, to live these difficult days, to navigate these tricky times, and Be'ezrat Hashem, it will end soon with Biat God Tzedek B'mehera B'yomeinu. Yishar Koach to all of you.